Willkommen zu meinem allerersten Let's Play. Nun, Let's Read, besser gesagt. Witch on the Holy Night. Fangen wir doch gleich mal an. Für die 5 Zuschauer, die dieses Video gefunden haben, viel Spaß. It was a winter's day, 8 years prior, when it happened. That solemn morning, when she understood the value of life for the very first time. Her home was nestled on the side of a mountain. Around it was nothing but inhospitable wilderness. She had no neighbors or childhood friends to speak of. Things like traveling to school or playing outside were more trouble than they ought to be. Indeed, with its pure water and bright stars, it was a place with rich memories, both frustrating and halcyon. That was only during summer, though. Winter in those mountains were extremely frigid, each morning more severe than the last. Her father would drive her to the train station, after waiting 10 minutes for the engine to warm up and the iced over windows to clear. Her father would savor his morning coffee, leaving her to venture outside and rev the engine. Out the front door she would go, traversing the garden with icy breath, until she reached that old sedan. As always, she inserted the key, then started the ignition. The engine rumbled to life. Just as she proudly finished that humble task she'd done so many times before. Okay. A shrill scream pierced the air. She knew, even though it wasn't human, that the feeble sound was a cry of agony. A few moments passed. Her father came out and opened the hood of the car. Creaking fan belts. Oh god. A monstrous-looking engine. And something that didn't belong. Die Katze beim Motor. There was a cat, a mother, by the looks of it, and her 2 kittens. The 3 cats had been huddling for warmth in the engine's compartment. Oof. The mother cat was missing its head. Das sieht man glücklicherweise nicht auf dem Bild. Been mangled beyond recognition by the engine instantly. The other kitten panted faintly. It desperately clung to its mother, or rather, that chunk of meat that was its mother, with the last bit of life it could muster. Ein schöner Start. Her father lamented their plight. The previous night had been especially cold. After he had returned home yesterday, the cats must have snuck under the hood, drowned by the warmth of the engine. They had slept next to the engine and awoken to a storm of spinning belts. Cars in the 80s were not sealed particularly well, so this was not unheard of. Yeah, vielleicht. Her father's voice seemed distant. She could only make out a small tuft of the kitten's grey fur. The rest of it was caked in the blood of its mother and brother. I can see its skull. The fragile life of a speckled kitten. The trembling and possibly blind, it continued to nuzzle against its dead mother's chest. She took the kitten into her arms and ran deep into the mountains to her grandfather's house. Was it because she was overcome with regret? Or was it the shock of grief? Years later, she still wasn't sure. Fighting back the welling tears, she burst into her grandfather's workshop. Her grandfather was a magician who could do anything. She had never seen magic. She knew that magic was a fantasy straight out of a fairy tale. But so was her grandfather. She had to find him. He was the only one who could help. The cave-dwelling magician said indifferently. This kitten needs our help, she pleaded. Whether it was a simple task or a Herculean labor, her grandfather would not say. He simply granted the girl's childish wish, like a machine. Wie nett. Before she knew it, however, she was holding a tiny corpse in her hands. Okay, ich nehme das zurück. Its fur was cold. The warmth of life had left its body. And the tears she had fought so hard to hold back poured from her eyes. Regret spread through her chest like an endless grey sky. Tja, hättest mal schneller rennen müssen. Her mind struggled to come to grips what had just occurred. The last 10 minutes were a total blank. Who she met, what she had known, it was all as if it never happened. The only thing she was sure of was that life, once extinguished, can never return. That day, it was her mistake that gave birth to me. Indeed. Whatever occurred that day, it was a day of nostalgia and longing. This is the fairy tale of 8 years ago. The day they first met that no magic can ever bring back. Ah. Ein bisschen klareres Bild. Arrogant, greedy, and able only to destroy. It must be a wolf. I don't have regrets. There's no looking back. If my pride has left you behind, my sincere condolences. But at any rate, I suppose it's my fate to die at the hands of Little Red Riding Hood. Strange one. Mit Start kann ich speichern. Okay. It was a quiet morning. From her bed, she could see the sky was an ashen watercolor gray. The thermometer displayed 43 degrees Fahrenheit. A rather unforgiving temperature for November. Keine Ahnung, was das in Celsius ist. Her stomach woke her up with a growl, pathetically, reminding her that she had completely missed breakfast. But lazy mornings like today were for her a blessing. It was already well past 8 in the morning. On any ordinary weekday, tardiness would be unavoidable, but today classes were cancelled in commemoration of the school's anniversary. Gratefully, she had every intention of taking it easy for the first time in ages. Outside the window was a gloomy grey, and it reminded her of more of. Sorry, ich fang nochmal an. Outside the window was a gloomy grey, and it reminded her more of evening than morning. It wasn't a pleasant morning by any stretch of the imagination. But having been up all night until just 3 hours ago, she couldn't care less about the weather outside. Oh, ich kenne das Gefühl. All she cared about was more sleep. Oh, ich kenne wirklich das Gefühl. As long as she could spend her morning in bed, that what was happening outside was of no concern of her. Ich glaube, ich bin jetzt schon verliebt. She shut the curtains. Then closed her eyes and tried to let sleep reclaim her.
せめてあと2時間ぐらいは凡庸な夢を見ていられますように。
Blissful slumber found her soon enough. Her consciousness faded. However, her simple request would be mercilessly refused. A faint but shrill sound lingered in her ears. It was the unmistakable ring of a telephone. Much to her chagrin, out of habit, her eyes popped open.
こんな日に限って。
The telephone was situated in the foyer, on the first floor. Answering it meant walking down a 30-foot corridor and going down a flight of stairs. In a sleep-deprived state, that distance seemed somewhere between incredibly far and astronomically far. Yeah, ich kenne das Gefühl. The phone's incessant ringing continued. She knew the caller would eventually give up, but if she ignored it, but she chose to fight the urge.
アリス出ないの？
She thought her housemate would get it, but she soon had to abandon all hope. The realization struck that her housemate did not have the day off from school and was likely in class at her prestigious little hilltop academy. The caller proved incredibly persistent. That persistence made the volume of the ringing seem even louder.
もうせっかくの安眠を。
Steck das Telefon aus. She was left with no choice but to get up, throw a top on, and leave the room. She rubbed her hands together to warm her numb fingers. The mansion's heating system was inadequate, to say the least. which meant that winter was the very worst of uninvited guests. Never more so than on a dreary morning as this, when one didn't need to use a thermometer to know how cold it was. The mansion sat in the mountains and was surrounded by dense forests. Winter always arrived here first, before moving on to nearby towns. The robotic ring of the telephone reverberated throughout the long hallway. The mansion's furnishings had been so perfectly maintained that it made the place feel unlived. It seemed lonelier than it did splendid. Coupled with the dreary morning, it could have passed for a haunted house.
ま、幽霊屋敷そのものだけど、だいたい2人で住むには広すぎるのよ、かなり。
She counted more than 30 rings since it first began. The caller either had a lot of free time on their hands or had a good understanding of the house's circumstances. She had a strong hunch that it was the latter. The windows above looked out onto a gloomy sky. She hastened to catch the unrelenting ring in the act as soon as possible. Though she had a feeling that her happy morning might come to a close the moment she caught it. Ja, muss ja irgendwas Wichtiges sein, wenn er so lange klingeln lässt. It was here that a series of incidents began. Apologies for the lack of romance to this tale. For whether it be objectively true or merely supposition, it is always from gloomy and unassuming beginnings that extraordinary events are set into motion. Oh, ein Intro. Ja, ja, zeigt nur nicht das Gesicht. Schöne Stadt. Und der Himmel klart sogar auf. Ein schöner Start. Und hier ist der Titel. Mahotsukai no Yome. Das ist, glaube ich, der japanische Titel. Von den Machern der Fate-Serie. The rain had subsided somewhat by the time she reached the school gate. Sunlight seemed to be playing peekaboo behind the clouds in the distance. It looked like it might be cleared up by early afternoon.
と言っても私には関係のない話だけど。
The weather reflected her luck. On top of being forced out of the house at such an early hour, she had to suffer through a winter rain. I'm getting a bad feeling about this. The sinking feeling she had only grew as she passed through the entrance and headed inside. She didn't encounter any other students along the way. Nor did she see anyone taking part in club activities either. The reception desk to the faculty room simply read "Faculty closed." The school had given all of its students the day off. Except those explicitly summoned like her. A fact that irked her more and more as the minutes passed. She opened the door to the faculty room and headed towards the desk she had visited a number of times before. The man at the desk wore a plain shirt and suit that were nonetheless neatly pressed. Slim-framed glasses adorned his face, giving off an amicable yet cunning air. The mild-mannered image this mid-twenties man presented clashed with the cigarette he smoked. He didn't appear to have noticed her yet.
Yamashiro-sensei.
She closed the door with a bang. Showing no response to the sudden sound, Mr. Yamashiro lifted his head.
Yeah, ohayo, Aozaki-kun. 要件は聞いているかな?
はい、1時間前に自宅で事前に何の相談もなく。
Having graduated from this high school himself, Mr. Yamashiro was not much older than the rest of the students. For that reason, the students preferred him over the other teachers. He always had something interesting to talk about and kept conversations casual. In fact, he seemed more like an older student than a teacher, but she unfortunately didn't share her fellow students' fondness of him. She was of the opinion that teachers should come across as more austere, like an iron fist that could inspire both love and hate in equal measures, not a body to choke and paw around with. No, das mag ich eigentlich auch lieber. Ich mag keine Lehrer, die so auf Bro machen. He was the exact opposite of how she felt a teacher should be. It was only natural that her manner towards him would be forced and unfriendly. Not that she'd ever been wired to make friendly small talk.
今日 もご機嫌斜めみたいだね、君は。
Ne, sie ist früh
そ
aufgestanden.
れは先生の気のせいです。今日だけ特別という話ではありませんから。
The matter-of-fact answer perfectly matched the displeasure displayed on her face. Her bad mood from having to get up early and the tiredness from staying up late must have collectively made her look positively adversarial.
そうならいいんだけどね。彼にはそう辛く当たらないでくれよ。僕らじゃ正直どう扱っていいかわからないところもあるし。
Gast.
先生、その件ですけど、私まだ詳しい話を聞かされていないのですが。
As Mr. Yamashiro met her piercing eyes, he finally understood the reason behind her tone, and slowly put out his cigarette.
電話じゃあなんて聞いたの？
転入生の紹介をするとだけです。理由も脈絡もない説明でした。
One of Mr. Yamashiro's eyebrows stood up, impressed with the brevity of her answer. He could see that she was angry, not because she had been called to school on her day off, but because she hadn't been told why she was here. Mr. Yamashiro chuckled sympathetically.
先生、これが笑い話ならそろそろ帰っていいでしょうか。
いや、ごめん謝るよ。冗談じゃなくて真面目な話なんだ。
本当に転入生の問題で。
訳ありというか難しいというか。彼、宗十郎君と言うんだけど、ちょっといろいろとずれていてね。僕らが案内してあげるより同世代の君の方が適任だと思ったんだ。
Okay. She threw him an amused look. It was negligent, ich kann es nicht aussprechen, of them to be pushing teaching duties on her. But she did wonder how exactly this transfer student was peculiar. Maybe he meant the student had behavioral problems or was difficult somehow. But peculiar? She didn't have the slightest idea what that meant.
ずれてるなんてそう使わない表現だけど。
She had her doubts, but swept them aside for now. This wasn't the time to get distracted by more concerns. The fact remained that this conversation was all that peculiar she could handle, and she needed more information. She was already beginning to fantasize about saying no and curling up in her warm bed at home.
一つ質問があります。
何？あ、学年は君と同じ2年生で、性格は落ち着きがあって人の話をよく聞くタイプ。裏を返せば覇気がないとも取れるけど、青崎くんとはクラスは違うけどきっと仲良くな。
そういったことは本人から直接聞きますし、測ります。そうではなく、なぜ私なんでしょうか。
Though her tone was still stern, it was clear that she was willing to cooperate. She had decided to put her feelings on dissatisfaction aside and focus on the task at hand. Forcing herself to act empathetic in spite of her self-absorbed nature was something she was used to. Paradoxically, this force of will was also the reason teachers put so much faith in her. To a point. At times, that strength shattered expectation, and on those occasions, they were left with no choice but to treat it like a natural disaster and weather it until it passed. That was how Mr. Yamashiro had come to deal with her as over the past year.
もう一度だけ聞きます、山城先生。それでなぜ私なんでしょうか。
Pressured by a question without a clear yes or no answer, he answered.
それはね、別に青崎くんが先生方に敬遠されているのと同じぐらい信頼されていて、学校のためなら教師も生徒も一緒くたに切って捨てる鉄の生徒会長だからじゃないよ。
Danke für die Erklärung.
それ以外にこんな呼びつけを受ける理由はないと思いますけど。
Her eyes did nothing to hide her disbelief as she glared at him. Strength far beyond that of an ordinary 17-year-old girl, coupled with the youthful beauty of one. Mr. Yamashiro let slip a genuine smile, admiring the miraculous balance of qualities.
いや、責務だけでいいなら僕がやってるさ。この人選に関しちゃ教師や生徒会長といった役職も関係ないよ。なんていうか、こんな頼みを損得抜きで聞いてくれるのは君だけだと思ってね。適任ですからと強く推薦したわけ。
In other words, he knew she wouldn't say no. Oh God.
山城先生。
Das kommt mir auch allzu bekannt vor.
怖っ。もう睨まない睨まない。言ったろ、僕にはともかく彼には笑顔でって。とまあ納得してくれたならすぐに移動しよう。もう随分待たせてしまっているからね。それと雨の中ご苦労様。帰りはもちろん車で送るよ。
Mr. Yamashiro stood up gracefully. I'm good, thanks, she replied, before turning and walking out of the faculty room. He had been waiting for about an hour. While he did, the rain shower lightened into a drizzle. His mind wandered as he listened to the sound of the raindrops. Wir wechseln die Perspektive. The room was filled with neatly arranged rectangular tables. He was the only one there. Quite some time had passed since he had been brought to this room and asked to wait. Even the best behaved student might have grown dissatisfied or anxious with the situation by now, but the boy stuck to his spot like a sick scarecrow. He was chilled to the bone. It was the end of November, and the low temperature in the morning had marked the start of winter. The room was not much warmer. The heater hadn't been turned on. Either he missed the teachers telling him to turn it on, or he had never seen one in his life. He breathed lightly on his freezing fingers as he aimlessly surveyed his surroundings. This dreary place was apparently a meeting room. The other students might have considered it a wonderful place to meet, but to him it was drab and overly spacious. It was a lifeless place that reminded him of an arid cave. Stuck in this cold room with absolutely nothing to do, his mind turned to what they wanted to discuss. Unable to come up with a solid answer, he returned his attention to the sound of the rain. The rain hardly resembled the rain in the mountains, though he could still recognize it barely. Its smells and sounds were harsher, but at the end of the day, rain was still rain. So even this world, alien as it was, could have something in common with the mountains. That trivial detail perked him up a little. He liked how the town looked soaked in rain. Naturally, he preferred sunny weather, but he liked rain in its own way. The fog from the rain had soaked up the scent of the soil, and it reminded him of home. It was at times like these that he was able to numb the anxiety the city gave him. But then he let out a discouraged sigh. How pathetic. He'd already been here 2 weeks, and thought of his hometown still made him sad. Perhaps feeling that he was being unfair to his new life, he composed himself and continued to wait patiently. Schon wieder kein Gesicht. Aber Bandagen. As if having a passion for distractions, his attention returned to the sound of the rain once more. Waiting like this didn't seem to be particularly hard for him. He quietly endured the numbing cold and the hour alone with calm, deep breaths. As the saying goes, good things come to those who wait. A strong point of his or not, he was astonishingly patient. It was certainly helping him out in this moment. She, on the other hand, was livid. The profile of the transfer student had been explained to her on her way to the meeting room. She was told he had lived his whole life up in the mountains without any electricity. Oh my God, armer Kerl, ich könnte das nicht. That means more than half of civilized society would have been an utter mystery to him.
なんて絶望的な断絶。戦後どころか戦前の話じゃない。ロビンソンにも程がある。
Robinson? She had every right to be angry. His village had apparently remained isolated in the mountains for many years. Contact with villages in the foothills of the mountains only occurred once a month or so, which was unfathomable in modern Japan. Although expressways and Japan Rail, the old national railway, now spanned the country like arteries, it wasn't entirely impossible for mountain villages like his to exist. But she couldn't imagine how someone born to such circumstances would think or live.
電気がないって村に行き渡っていないだけで公衆電話ぐらいはあったんですよね。
なかったそうだよ。こっちに暮らすようになってまず驚いたのが電話だそうだし、電話って便利ですねなんて真顔で言われてね、そういえばそうだなぁと再確認させられたぐらいだよ。
She shot a sidelong glare his way as he laughed. It seemed that the naivety of the country boy had cheered up Mr. Yamashiro a bit.
駐在もいないってことか。うちも実家は山奥ですから電気が通っていないのはありえないとは言いませんけど、そいつ学校も知らないんですか？
Okay, jetzt wird's ein bisschen merkwürdig.
どんなものかは知っていたそうだけど、実際来るのは今日が初めてらしい。それで緊張していたのかな。あまり会話も弾まなかった。
Hat er in der Höhle gewohnt oder was?
ああいうのも野生児っていうのかな。狼に育てられた狼少年みたいな。 いや、探検隊の話だね。怖いな、青崎くん。冗談だって。大丈夫。話してみた感じ、おとなしい子だったから。なんていうか、言葉の通じない小動物みたいな感じ。
Nette Beschreibung.
山城先生、その例え気休めになってませんから。
As she gave her blunt reply, she tried to simulate in her mind what life without electricity would be like. But the thought of it took her sour mood from bad to worse. After all, it was a world she had never known. She could understand why the teacher had given up. She too wanted to give up and return to a warm bed, but her good-for-nothing pride was holding her hostage. Not only did the teachers believe she was up to the task, but she also believed she could do it. It wasn't that easy to go back on her word, no matter how bad things looked after the fact. She walked along the hallway, the rain pattering in the background. The meeting room was already inside. With a furrowed brow, she fixed her long hair with a furrowed brow, she fixed her long hair in anticipation of meeting the unknown stranger within. Her elegant strides were like those of a confident general going into battle.
いや、青崎くん、君を信頼してる僕だけど、念のため確認しておくよ。なんていうか、優しくね。で、
作り笑いは
Oh,
苦手です。
Entschuldigung.
一応努力しているつもりですが。
ああ、そうなんだ。それはよかった。いやー、ほんとよかった。青崎くんにも苦手なものってあったんだね。
Mr. Yamashiro's shoulders slumped the second they reached the meeting room. As he put his hand on the door, his eyes seemed to say to her, "Be nice, please." This only made her more irritated.
分かってるわよ、愛想が悪いっての。でも笑顔なんて意識して作るものじゃないんだし。だいたいそういうインスタントな人付き合いなら飛び丸の方が向いてるって。
Tobimaru, hä? Und wer ist das? She sighed about her social shortcomings. But then it occurred to her that being called into school on a day off while sleep deprived wasn't anything to smile about anyway. She also thought the person responsible for this mess would be better off attending elementary school. It might not be his fault, but neither was her duty or obligation to do the teacher's work for them. At the very least, they could have used their brains and organized all this on a normal school day. Another complaint she wanted to voice later.
いや、というか敵。なんであろうと敵。悪いけど、情状酌量以前に敵。
Klingt eher so, als hätte der Lehrer Schuld, nicht der Typ.
間が悪いのはお互い様っていうか、本当なんでよりにもよってこんな忙しい時に。
Bissy, du wolltest schlafen. Her pounding headache from a lack of sleep had boosted her aggression by 10%. No matter how harmless the guy on the other side of the door may be, anyone who disturbed her sleep was the enemy. And just as she was reaching peak annoyance, Mr. Yamashiro opened the door to the meeting room. The room slowly slid into view. She didn't care for formalities. Just looked straight ahead and stormed into the room. and found herself face to face with a most unusual opponent. Before we go on, let's see from another perspective. Turning back the clock just a little. You don't have to do anything. For some, these words are priceless luxury. For the others, they are unbearable torture. For the proactive girl, it was definitely the former, though she'd be too suspicious of the motives of anyone giving her such a gift to accept it. For the passive boy, it was definitely the latter, a bitter thorn that made him homesick. Though at this very moment, his mind was still distracted with the wait for his face to reveal any discontent. He maintained perfect posture as he stared at the grey sky. He had already waited a whole hour, but figured they must have had their reasons for making him wait. And as long as he had the sound of the rain to soothe him, he could keep on waiting.
でもそろそろ9時を過ぎるのか。どうなんだろう。
He had been vaguely keeping track of the time as he listened to the rain. Due to the holiday, the school building was completely silent, except for the patter of the rain on the window. The mood felt as damp as the air. It was then he heard the heavy clatter of footsteps approaching.
よかった。忘れられているかと思った。
Uh-oh. He could hear two sets of footsteps, one heavier set belonging to an adult. He breathed a sigh of relief as the door slid open.
すまないね。随分とお待たせしちゃって。
The first person he saw was a man wearing glasses and an awkward smile. That's Mr. Yamashiro, the one who brought me here.
ってあれ？里中先生いないんですか？ひどいな。話し相手になってあげてと言ったのに。
Mr. Yamashiro scratched his head, looking increasingly apologetic. And then, from behind him, with a tight-lipped expression that made it clear she didn't want to be there, a dark-haired girl with a determined look in her eyes appeared. Soichiro gulped. The sound of the rain on the window faded into nothingness. That's when he knew. This was how it felt when time stood still. Ah, Gesicht. Das zweite Gesicht. Cute. She blinked quickly a few times as if taken aback. Ah, Liebe auf den ersten Blick. Bestimmt. Why was anyone's guess? The boy was everything she expected a naive country boy to look like. However, she felt something she couldn't understand. Die Bandagen? His eyes widened slightly, as if taken aback. The reason was obvious. Putting his feelings into words was a different matter altogether. So we will never know exactly what he experienced in that moment. That's when it hit him. He sensed he'd been touched by the hands of destiny.
紹介するよ。彼が転入生の静木宗十郎くん。
Ich spiele das blind, aber irgendwie kommt mir der Name bekannt vor.
で、こっちの彼女が静木くんの案内役。うちの生徒会長で休日を押して新しい仲間の案内役を買って出てくれた青崎青子くんだ。
Aosaki, huh? His voice and the sound of the rain seemed distant. This is how they first met. Such was their start, for better or worse, like the ephemeral beauty of fireworks. Pitter patter. It was commonly believed among the students that Aoko was always in a foul mood. But this gossip was 90% prejudice, as Aoko simply didn't have time to be irritated 24/7. The reality was she simply didn't want to explain herself all the time, and therefore seemed angry about something, obvious or not. This idle gossip did, however, lead to her earning the title of one of the school's 7 deadly threats. The remaining 10% of the gossip was right on the mark. Aoko herself often had the feeling that her tendency to feel animosity towards harmless things was akin to what a chronic headache sufferer might experience. Today fell under that 10%. For today her anger was pure, her childish and selfish display was befitting of her actual age. Und wie alt bist du? The meeting room was dimly lit, awash in the colors of the rain. To reduce electricity cost, school regulations forbid the use of lights during the day. This was the setting of the 3 of them found themselves in. Her first impression was that his calm demeanor reminded her of a field of wild flowers. In spite of his perfect posture, he seemed subdued and frail. And though describing him as meek would be going too far, at the very least he was passive. Even though his uniform, she could see that he was thinner than average. His dark hair was unkempt, and he came across as a wholly forgettable boy. If she had to look at him in a more positive light, she would describe him more a young man than a boy. It was his calm demeanor that made him seem more mature. Was that the cause of Aoko's reasonless reaction? He seemed almost too at home in the meeting room, and she was left with the impression that it was her and the teacher, not this outsider, who were the guests here. She felt an unidentifiable aggravation building within her, almost as if her as if her right to be here was in question. Aoko felt herself raising her natural defenses.
信じられない。私、今わけもなく怒ってない。
Anscheinend. She hated not understanding things, her own emotions in particular. It pained her less than you would imagine for a perfectionist like her, but it still nagged her like a thorn in her side.
いやー ほら青崎くん挨拶してあげなくちゃ。
Mr. Yamashiro's attempt to relieve the tension was equally irritating.
挨拶？
After casting a nasty glance in the teacher's direction, Aoko turned to face the boy. From an outsider's perspective, it might have looked like a stare down. And in that instant, the culmination of her emotional state hurtled towards the innocent boy and skewered him.
いや待たせたねしずきくん。
Sagen wir mal, das war Part 1 von diesem Let's Play. Bis zum nächsten Mal.